She cannot read Latin. The Duke smirked, tearing the manuscript from his wife's hands. Then, before the king and 40 royal scholars, Adrian Blackwood, Duke of Ravenscroft, declared that his wife had forged her translation out of jealousy. Lady Cecily Vale will assume responsibility for all foreign correspondence from this hour forward, he announced. My wife's access to the royal archives is revoked. The words struck Eleanor more sharply than the laughter that followed them. For 6 years, she had translated letters no one else could decipher, corrected treaties before careless phrases became diplomatic insults, and warned Adrian whenever a foreign promise concealed a threat. Yet he had accepted every success in silence, allowing the court to believe the brilliance was his. Now he stood beside Lady Cecily, as if Eleanor had never served him at all. Eleanor looked toward the raised dais. King George sat beneath the crimson canopy, one hand resting on the carved arm of his chair. His expression revealed neither belief nor disbelief. That was more dangerous than anger. Your Grace, Eleanor said, you examined neither my notes nor the original manuscript. I examined enough. You read Lady Cecily's accusation. I read the evidence. No, you read what pleased you. A murmur moved through the chamber. Adrian's jaw tightened. That familiar movement once warned Eleanor that her husband was frightened, not furious. Today, however, wounded pride had made him reckless. He had been promised a place on the king's privy council. Cecily's uncle controlled 3 of the votes required to secure it. Eleanor understood at last why Adrian had refused to postpone the hearing. He had chosen ambition before truth. Your appointment is terminated, Adrian said. By sunset, the palace guards will collect your archive keys. Your mother's diplomatic pension will also be suspended until the accusation of forgery has been resolved. Eleanor's fingers curled against her skirts. He knew that pension paid for her mother's medicine. He had chosen the one punishment that might force Eleanor to beg. Lady Cecily watched her with a faint smile. Eleanor did not give either of them the satisfaction. Instead, she looked at the manuscript in Adrian's hand. Ask Lady Cecily to read the final sentence aloud. Cecily's smile disappeared. Adrian glanced down at the parchment. It has been damaged. The sentence remains legible. It is irrelevant. Then reading it should cost her nothing. Silence spread from the king's dais, through the rows of scholars. Cecily stepped closer to Adrian. Pearls trembled at her throat. The final line is a devotional invocation, she said. Its construction is obscure and contributes nothing to the treaty. Eleanor turned toward her. Read it. Cecily did not move. You told my husband that I mistranslated this manuscript, Eleanor continued. Surely you can read a single sentence. Cecily's gaze darted toward Sir Lucian Vale, her uncle, standing near the council table. He gave the smallest shake of his head. Eleanor saw it. So did the king. Read the sentence, Lady Cecily, His Majesty commanded. Cecily lifted the manuscript. Her lips parted, but no words came. Eleanor recited the line from memory. The Latin flowed through the chamber with the measured rhythm of a cathedral bell, yet it was not the polished Latin taught at Oxford or Cambridge. Its shortened vowels and archaic endings belonged to a rare ecclesiastical dialect used in the Western monasteries nearly 4 centuries earlier. Several scholars leaned forward. One elderly man rose so abruptly that his chair struck the stone floor. The Duchess pronounced it correctly, Professor Aldous Mercer said. Every syllable. Adrian's face hardened. Correct pronunciation does not prove authorship. No, Mercer replied slowly, but the sentence she recited was erased from the original manuscript centuries ago. Only 3 living scholars are known to have seen the restoration notes. The room turned toward Eleanor. Adrian's grip tightened around the parchment. How could you know it? He demanded. My father was one of those 3 scholars. A flicker of discomfort crossed Adrian's face. Eleanor had told him that during their first winter of marriage, he had either forgotten or decided it no longer mattered. She approached the council table and removed a small brass mirror from her reticule. This manuscript was kept beneath glass for generations, she explained. The erased ink left impressions in the fibers. They cannot be seen from above, but reflected candlelight reveals where the parchment was compressed. She placed the mirror beneath the lower edge of the page. A scholar adjusted the nearest candle. Faint brown letters appeared in the reflection. The first hidden line contained a prayer. The The second contained 3 names connected by a phrase that required no translation. "Those who consent to the removal of the king," someone gasped. King George rose. Professor Mercer bent over the mirror. "The first name belongs to Lord Haverford, executed for treason 12 years ago," said the king. "The second is Baron Mowbray, dead 9 years." Mercer hesitated before reading the third. Adrian stepped forward. "Speak." The scholar looked at him with horror. "Adrian Blackwood, Duke of Ravenscroft." Every face turned toward Eleanor's husband. The colour drained from Adrian's cheeks. For the first time that morning, Lady Cecily moved away from him. "That is impossible," Adrian said. "This manuscript has been sealed in the Royal Archive for 80 years. Eleanor studied the third name. The first 2 had faded to the colour of dried leaves. Adrian's name was darker, fresher. She touched the edge of the lettering without disturbing it, then examined the wax clinging to the manuscript's silk cord. The Royal Archive used crimson wax. This seal contained a thin vein of blue. Eleanor had seen that exact shade the previous evening on a letter Cecily carried from Sir Lucian's private office. "This name was added last night," Eleanor said. Adrian stared at her. "Then someone intends to accuse me of treason." "No," Eleanor replied, watching Cecily's hand close around the key hanging at her waist. "Someone intended for my translation to hide it." At that moment, the manuscript began to smoke. "She cannot read Latin," the Duke smirked, tearing the manuscript from his wife's hands. Then, before the king and 40 royal scholars, Adrian Blackwood, Duke of Ravenscroft, declared that his wife had forged her translation out of jealousy. "Lady Cecily Vale will assume responsibility for all foreign correspondence from this hour forward," he announced. "My wife's access to the Royal Archives is revoked." The words struck Eleanor more sharply than the laughter that followed them. For 6 years, she had translated letters no one else could decipher, corrected treaties before careless phrases became diplomatic insults, and warned Adrian whenever a foreign promise concealed a threat. Yet he had accepted every success in silence, allowing the court to believe the brilliance was his. Now he stood beside Lady Cecily, as if Eleanor had never served him at all. Eleanor looked toward the raised dais. King George sat beneath the crimson canopy, one hand resting on the carved arm of his chair. His expression revealed neither belief nor disbelief. That was more dangerous than anger. "Your Grace," Eleanor said, "you examined neither my notes nor the original manuscript." "I examined enough." "You read Lady Cecily's accusation." "I read the evidence." "No. You read what pleased you." A murmur moved through the chamber. Adrian's jaw tightened. That familiar movement once warned Eleanor that her husband was frightened, not furious. Today, however, wounded pride had made him reckless. He had been promised a place on the King's Privy Council. Cecily's uncle controlled 3 of the votes required to secure it. Eleanor understood at last why Adrian had refused to postpone the hearing. He had chosen ambition before truth. "Your appointment is terminated," Adrian said. "By sunset, the palace guards will collect your archive keys. Your mother's diplomatic pension will also be suspended until the accusation of forgery has been resolved." Eleanor's fingers curled against her skirts. He knew that pension paid for her mother's medicine. He had chosen the one punishment that might force Eleanor to beg. Lady Cecily watched her with a faint smile. Eleanor did not give either of them the satisfaction. Instead, she looked at the manuscript in Adrian's hand. "Ask Lady Cecily to read the final sentence aloud." Cecily's smile disappeared. Adrian glanced down at the parchment. "It has been damaged. The sentence remains legible. It is irrelevant. Then reading it should cost her nothing." Silence spread from the king's dais through the rows of scholars. Cecily stepped closer to Adrian. Pearls trembled at her throat. "The final line is a devotional invocation," she said. "Its construction is obscure and contributes nothing to the treaty." Eleanor turned toward her. "Read it." Cecily did not move. "You told my husband that I mistranslated this manuscript," Eleanor continued. "Surely you can read a single sentence." Cecily's gaze darted towards Sir Lucian Vale, her uncle, standing near the council table. He gave the smallest shake of his head. Eleanor saw it. So did the king. "Read the sentence, Lady Cecily," His Majesty commanded. Cecily lifted the manuscript. Her lips parted, but no words came. Eleanor recited the line from memory. The Latin flowed through the chamber, with the measured rhythm of a cathedral bell. Yet it was not the polished Latin taught at Oxford or Cambridge. Its shortened vowels and archaic endings belonged to a rare ecclesiastical dialect used in the Western monasteries nearly 4 centuries earlier. Several scholars leaned forward. One elderly man rose so abruptly that his chair struck the stone floor. "The Duchess pronounced it correctly," Professor Aldous Mercer said. "Every syllable." Adrian's face hardened. "Correct pronunciation does not prove authorship." "No," Mercer replied slowly. "But the sentence she recited was erased from the original manuscript centuries ago. Only 3 living scholars are known to have seen the restoration notes." The room turned toward Eleanor. Adrian's grip tightened around the parchment. "How could you know it?" he demanded. "My father was one of those 3 scholars." A flicker of discomfort crossed Adrian's face. Eleanor had told him that during their first winter of marriage, he had either forgotten or decided it no longer mattered. She approached the council table and removed a small brass mirror from her reticule. "This manuscript was kept beneath glass for generations," she explained. "The erased ink left impressions in the fibers. They cannot be seen from above, but reflected candlelight reveals where the parchment was compressed." She placed the mirror beneath the lower edge of the page. A scholar adjusted the nearest candle. Faint, brown letters appeared in the reflection. The first hidden line contained a prayer. The second contained 3 names, connected by a phrase that required no translation. "Those who consent to the removal of the king." Someone gasped. King George rose. Professor Mercer bent over the mirror. "The first name belongs to Lord Haverford, executed for treason 12 years ago," said the king. "The second is Baron Mowbray, dead 9 years." Mercer hesitated before reading the third. Adrian stepped forward. "Speak." The scholar looked at him with horror. "Adrian Blackwood, Duke of Ravenscroft." Every face turned toward Eleanor's husband. The colour drained from Adrian's cheeks. For the first time that morning, Lady Cecily moved away from him. "That is impossible," Adrian said. "This manuscript has been sealed in the Royal Archive for 80 years. Eleanor studied the third name. The first 2 had faded to the colour of dried leaves. Adrian's name was darker, fresher. She touched the edge of the lettering without disturbing it, then examined the wax clinging to the manuscript's silk cord. The Royal Archive used crimson wax. This seal contained a thin vein of blue. Eleanor had seen that exact shade the previous evening on a letter Cecily carried from Sir Lucian's private office. "This name was added last night," Eleanor said. Adrian stared at her. "Then someone intends to accuse me of treason." "No," Eleanor replied, watching Cecily's hand close around the key hanging at her waist. "Someone intended for my translation to hide it." At that moment, the manuscript began to smoke. Adrian reached the chamber doors first. "Open them." The guards hesitated until King George gave a sharp nod. The doors swung inward, revealing a young officer streaked with soot. "The order arrived 20 minutes ago," he said between breaths. "It commanded the garrison to admit 6 wagons carrying replacement powder. The signature and seal appeared to be yours, Your Grace." "I issued no such order," Adrian said. The captain challenged it, but Lady Cecily's authorization was attached. Every gaze turned toward Cecily. Her face remained pale, though her voice recovered its composure. "My authorization was stolen. The key found beneath my uncle's foot proves someone has been attempting to implicate us all." Sir Lucian seized upon the explanation. "This conspiracy is larger than any person in this chamber. We should evacuate His Majesty immediately." "No," Eleanor said. Adrian rounded on her. "The South Fort may already be compromised, and every road leading from the palace may be watched. The forged order was designed to draw the king into the open." King George looked at the soot-covered officer. "What happened after the wagons entered?" "The first wagon caught fire near the Western Magazine. The garrison contained it, but the others scattered through the fort. Armed men emerged from beneath the canvas." "How many?" "Perhaps 30. Adrian turned toward the king. "Give me command of the palace guard. I can retake the fort before nightfall." Eleanor saw Sir Lucian relax. That frightened her more than the report of armed men. "The attackers want you at the fort," she told Adrian. "You cannot know that. Your name appears on their order. If you lead soldiers against them, they will either kill you or surrender while claiming they acted under your command." The chamber fell silent. Adrian's expression shifted. as he understood the trap. If the attackers escaped, he would appear incompetent. If captured, they could identify him as their leader. Any action taken under his seal would strengthen the accusation already hidden in the manuscript. "Then what do you propose?" he asked. Before Eleanor could answer, Cecily stepped forward. "Her Grace has already touched the forged order, the manuscript, the mirror, and the handkerchief. Must we now allow her to direct the king's army? You invited this danger into the palace," Eleanor said. Cecily's eyes flashed. "You have no proof. I have your archive key, found beneath my uncle's boot after you crossed the room, and the blue wax upon your glove." Cecily raised her stained thumb. This came from sealing invitations for the Queen's charity concert. The explanation sounded simple enough to reassure several scholars. Adrian looked at Eleanor. "Cecily used blue wax publicly yesterday. You must admit the color proves nothing." He had noticed a contradiction and chosen the answer requiring the least sacrifice. Eleanor felt the old ache beneath her ribs, the pain of speaking truth to a man who valued it only when it served him. "Then ask her where the invitations are," she said. Cecily did not hesitate. "In my apartments, sealed, addressed, and ready for delivery." "Of course." King George sent 2 guards to retrieve them. Cecily watched the doors close behind them. Her calm returned, but Eleanor saw the pulse beating too quickly at her throat. "The fort cannot wait," Adrian said. "No," Eleanor agreed. "Send no soldiers bearing your colors. Order the northern garrison to close the Dover Road while the palace guard protects the king here. Then dispatch a messenger with a verbal command known only to the fort's captain." Adrian studied her. "What verbal command?" "The phrase written inside the sword you presented to him last winter." He stared at her in surprise. "You remember that?" I translated the inscription. For one brief moment, the chamber and its accusations disappeared. Adrian looked at her as he had during their first year of marriage, when he would leave difficult correspondence beside her tea and wait impatiently while she uncovered meanings everyone else had missed. Then Cecily touched his sleeve. "The Duchess was dismissed from royal service," she reminded him. "Her instructions have no authority." Eleanor met Adrian's eyes. "You may call it my instruction, or pretend it was your own. Innocent men will live either way." Shame moved across his face. He turned to the officer. "Send the northern garrison. The verbal command is fortitude before glory. Tell the captain to lock the powder magazine and capture the attackers alive." The officer bowed and hurried away. It was a small victory, but Eleanor understood its value. Adrian had followed her judgment before the entire court, even while denying her title to offer it. Cecily understood too. Her hand slipped from his sleeve. The 2 guards returned 15 minutes later without the invitations. "Lady Cecily's writing desk was open," one reported. "The drawers had been emptied. Her maid is missing." Cecily staggered backward. "My maid must have stolen the wax and the key." "How conveniently disloyal," Eleanor said. "I trusted her, as my husband trusted you." Adrian flinched. Solution stepped between the women. "The maid's disappearance confirms my niece is another victim, or it gives Lady Cecily someone who cannot defend herself," Eleanor replied. Professor Mercer had been examining the damaged manuscript near the window. He now called Eleanor toward him. Beneath the burned corner lay a narrow strip of linen, sewn between 2 layers of parchment. A symbol had been embroidered upon it in blue thread, a winged lion holding a broken chain. Eleanor recognized it at once. Her father had shown her the same emblem shortly before his death. It belonged to a secret fraternity of translators who believed governments should be controlled by those who controlled their words. "The silent chapter," Eleanor whispered. Adrian heard her. "That society disappeared 20 years ago. My father believed it had entered the royal archives. And you never told me?" "I tried. You called it an old scholar's superstition." Regret darkened his eyes, but he said nothing. Mercer used his tweezers to lift the linen. Something metallic struck the table beneath it. A tiny brass type 1 letter from a printer's press. Eleanor picked it up with the corner of her handkerchief. It was the letter R. The surface carried a smear of blue wax and a strand of pale silk. Cecily's gown was pale blue silk. Yet when Eleanor looked up, Cecily was no longer beside Adrian. She stood at the edge of the council table, watching Eleanor with undisguised hatred. For the first time, the elegant mask had slipped. Eleanor had not merely survived the accusation, She had prevented the Duke from entering the military trap, exposed the missing invitations, and found a physical link to the altered manuscript. Cecily now understood that removing Eleanor from the council would not be enough. She leaned toward Solution and whispered something Eleanor could not hear. Lucian looked toward the royal guards, then toward the doors. A bell rang somewhere beyond the chamber. Once, twice, on the third strike, every candle went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Eleanor heard running feet, a woman's cry, and the scrape of steel leaving a sheath. Then Adrian's hand found hers. Before either of them could speak, a blade cut through the darkness exactly where Eleanor had been standing. Adrian dragged Eleanor against his chest as the blade struck the council table. Wood splintered beside her shoulder. "Stay behind me," he said. A second blade flashed through the darkness. Eleanor heard Adrian grunt, then felt something warm drip across the hand holding hers. "You are bleeding." "It is nothing." The attacker pulled the blade free and struck again. Eleanor seized the brass mirror from the table and angled it toward the high windows. Moonlight caught its surface, casting a thin silver beam across the chamber. For an instant, she saw a masked man rushing toward the king. "Your Majesty, down!" She hurled the mirror. It struck the attacker's wrist. His sword clattered across the floor before the royal guards brought him down. At the western doors, another shadow slipped into the corridor. "Do not pursue him," Eleanor warned. "Protect the king." The guards obeyed. A scholar relit one candle, then another. The chamber emerged from darkness in broken fragments. Overturned chairs, terrified faces, and Adrian standing before Eleanor, with blood running from a cut along his upper arm. The captured attacker lay beneath 3 guards. His mask was torn away. No one recognized him. Eleanor looked toward Cecily and Solution. Both remained inside the chamber. Cecily had one hand pressed dramatically over her heart, while her uncle supported her elbow. "You saved His Majesty," Adrian said. Before Eleanor could answer, Cecily stepped forward. "The Duke saved us all. I saw him pull the Duchess away before the assassin could reach her." A wave of grateful voices rose around Adrian. Eleanor stared at Cecily. The woman had transformed Eleanor's warning, her mirror, and her decision to keep the guards beside the king into another victory for the Duke. Adrian could have corrected them with a single sentence. Instead, he accepted the captain's salute. Eleanor released his hand. The movement was small, but he felt it. "Eleanor, your wound requires attention, Your Grace. So does your shoulder." Only then did she notice the cut in her sleeve. The sword had grazed her skin, leaving a narrow red line beneath the torn silk. "It is nothing," she said, repeating his own dismissal. His mouth tightened. The captured assassin refused to speak. A guard searched his coat and found no letters, money, or identifying marks. His boots were common military issue, but the leather carried fine grey dust. Eleanor crouched to examine it. "The palace courtyard is wet from yesterday's rain," she said. "He did not enter through the main gates. There are service tunnels beneath the eastern wing," Adrian replied. "Sealed 40 years ago," said Solution. "Not all of them," Eleanor said. She remembered a Latin inventory she had translated while restoring the royal archive. One passage described a forgotten delivery stair connecting the old printing room to the council wing. "Where does the stair begin?" the king asked. "Behind the former royal press." Cecily gave a brittle laugh. Once again, the Duchess conveniently remembers an obscure document at precisely the right moment. Eleanor rose. "Because I translated it. A translation no one else has seen." "I have seen it," Professor Mercer said. The old scholar approached slowly, holding a hand against his bruised temple. 3 years ago, Her Grace found 7 boxes of royal records, mislabeled as church accounts. She translated the inventory and warned that the old passage should be sealed. Adrian looked toward Eleanor. "You told me the archive required repairs. I gave you a list. I never saw any mention of a passage. You returned it unread and told me to speak with your secretary." The words landed harder than an accusation. Mercer continued. "The Duchess paid for the Iron Gate herself when the council refused the expense." "Then how did the attacker enter?" Cecily demanded. Eleanor examined the grey dust again. Mixed within it were tiny orange flakes. "Because the gate has recently been cut. King George ordered 6 guards to search the old printing room." Eleanor started after them. Adrian caught her wrist. You are injured. A scratch will not stop me. The man who escaped may be waiting there. So, may the records that prove who admitted him. I will go. You cannot recognize the inventory marks. Then tell me what to seek. Eleanor pulled her wrist free. I spent 6 years telling you what to seek. You spent 6 years deciding whether I deserve to be heard. Pain flickered across his face. Before he could reply, Cecily produced a folded letter from her sleeve. Your Majesty, perhaps this should be examined before the Duchess is allowed near another royal record. She handed it to the king. Eleanor recognized her own handwriting on the outside. Inside was a message addressed to the commander of the South Fort. It instructed him to admit the wagons and bore Eleanor's private signature. The room went still. That is not mine, Eleanor said. The handwriting appears identical, Solution observed. King George read the final lines. It promises the commander £5,000 from the Ravenscroft marriage settlement. Adrian went pale. Only a wife familiar with the settlement would know the sum held in its private trust. Cecily turned to him. You told me the Duchess controlled that money. She does not control it, Adrian replied. The trustees do, but she knows its terms. So do you, Eleanor said. Cecily's expression sharpened. You discussed my settlement in Adrian's library 2 nights ago. I heard you through the door. I discussed the pension you accused the Duke of cruelly suspending. You knew the exact amount promised in this letter. Adrian looked between them. Once again, he stood before 2 incompatible truths. Where did you obtain this? He asked Cecily. A palace servant found it beneath the Duchess's chair before the hearing. Which servant? Cecily hesitated. Her name is Mary. Bring her here, the king ordered. She has already left the palace. Another missing servant, Eleanor said. Solution spread his hands. Because frightened people flee conspiracies, or because invented witnesses cannot answer questions. The doors opened before the argument could continue. The guards returned with an iron lock split cleanly in 2. One carried a wooden box recovered from the abandoned printing room. Inside lay blank royal parchment, blue sealing wax, and metal letters from an old printing press. Every letter was present except one. Now, the brass type found inside the manuscript fit the empty space perfectly. Beneath the printing pieces was a stack of practice sheets covered in imitations of Eleanor's signature. Adrian lifted the top page. The first attempts were crude. The later ones were nearly perfect. Cecily gave a triumphant breath. Proof that Eleanor prepared the forged order. No, Eleanor said. Proof that someone practiced becoming me. She reached toward the page, then stopped before touching it. In the lower corner, beneath the repeated signatures, someone had written a single Latin sentence. Adrian recognized the handwriting first. That is yours. Yes, Eleanor said. Copied from a note I left in your library. The king looked at Adrian. Who had access to that room? Adrian's gaze moved toward Cecily. She had spent hours there under the pretext of helping him prepare for the Privy Council appointment. His chance to verify the truth had finally become impossible to ignore. Search Lady Cecily's apartments, Adrian ordered. Cecily's eyes widened. You cannot mean that. I do. Her fear lasted only a heartbeat. Then she smiled. I wondered how long your wife would need to turn you against me. She reached into her reticule and withdrew a second document bearing the royal seal. But before you search my rooms, your Majesty should read the confession I found there. She unfolded it. At the bottom stood Adrian's signature. Above it, in his unmistakable hand, were the words, My wife acted upon my command. Adrian read the confession twice. The first time, disbelief hardened his face. The second time, shame entered it. That is my signature, he said. Eleanor felt the chamber tilt beneath her. Cecily lowered the document with calculated sorrow. Then the Duchess did act under your command. No. Adrian's voice sharpened. I never wrote these words. But you signed the page. He looked at her. 3 days earlier, Cecily had brought a stack of council petitions into his library. She had placed small ribbons beside every line requiring his signature, flattering him with talk of the influence he would possess once appointed to the Privy Council. He had signed without reading. Eleanor understood before he confessed it. You gave her blank pages bearing your name, she said. They were not blank. Did you read them? Adrian's silence answered her. The king descended the final step from the dais. A royal fort has been attacked using your seal. A confession bearing your signature places responsibility upon your wife. Explain why I should not have both of you arrested. Because Eleanor warned you before the attack, Adrian said. She prevented me from entering the trap and saved your life when the assassin struck. It was the first time he had publicly credited her. It came after years of silence, and only when his own survival required the truth. Solution approached the king. Her Majesty's safety must come before marital loyalty. The Duchess possessed the knowledge required to discover every clue presented today. She also knew the secret passage and the terms of her marriage settlement, because she performed the work you now use against her, Professor Mercer protested, or because she designed the trail. Cecily's voice broke with convincing emotion. I did not wish to believe Eleanor capable of treason, but she despises her husband for ending her appointment. Perhaps she intended to destroy his political future and then appear as the only person clever enough to save the crown. The accusation was elegant because it converted every act of courage into evidence of guilt. Adrian looked toward the king's guards gathering around Eleanor. Give me 1 hour to examine the printing room. An hour gives conspirators time to escape, Lucian replied. Then place guards at every gate and leave the Duchess free to destroy whatever remains. Adrian's hand closed around the false confession. Eleanor knew that expression. He was measuring reputation against loyalty, choosing which loss the court might forgive. She stepped closer. Look at me, Adrian. He did. You had my translation before this hearing. You refused to read it. You gave Cecily authority over the archive without examining her accusation. You signed papers without reading them. Do not make ignorance your choice a third time. His throat moved. What would you have me do? Search Cecily's rooms. Question the guards who admitted her. Compare the paper in your hand with the paper from your library. Delay judgment until you possess facts. Cecily whispered. If you defend her now, everyone will believe the confession. That was the blade placed precisely against his ambition. If Adrian stood beside Eleanor, he risked being named her accomplice. If he surrendered her, he could claim he too had been deceived. King George held out his hand. Choose, Ravenscroft. Adrian stared at Eleanor. For a moment, she saw the man who had once sat beside her father's sickbed through an entire night. The man who had asked Eleanor to translate ancient love poems and laughed when she corrected his pronunciation. The man she had believed honorable even after tenderness became inconvenience. Then his gaze shifted toward the scholars witnessing his disgrace. Fear defeated memory. Until the investigation is concluded, Adrian said, the Duchess of Ravenscroft should be confined to the eastern apartments under royal guard. The words ended something between them. Eleanor did not weep. She removed the sapphire ring carrying the Ravenscroft crest and placed it upon the council table. Adrian stared at it. What are you doing? You have used my loyalty as evidence against me and my work as a weapon for another woman. You will not use my name as well. You remain my wife. By law, perhaps. Her voice did not rise, yet it carried through the chamber. But from this moment, I will no longer protect your pride from the consequences of your choices. Cecily lowered her eyes to hide her satisfaction. King George gave the guards permission to escort Eleanor away. As they approached, Professor Mercer stepped before her. If the Duchess is confined, allow me to preserve the evidence she discovered. Solution objected immediately. The professor is her ally. I am a servant of the Royal Archive, and therefore had access to every document involved. The king hesitated. That moment was enough for Cecily to intervene. Place the evidence under the authority of the acting head of the Translation Council. That is the lawful procedure. She meant herself. Eleanor turned to Adrian. If you give her the manuscript, the key, and the printing pieces, nothing will remain by morning. Cecily looked wounded. You accuse me because I replaced you. I accuse you because someone entered the archive through your authority. Adrian could still prevent the evidence from falling into her hands. Instead, he sought refuge in procedure. Lady Cecily will secure the documents in the council vault, he said. 2 royal guards will remain outside. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. There it was, the irreversible choice. By signing her confinement and transferring control of the evidence, Adrian had removed the only person Cecily feared and handed the suspected conspirator every object capable of exposing her. The guards took Eleanor's arms. She did not resist. As they escorted her from the chamber, She passed close to the captured assassin. His eyes were closed, but his fingers moved against the floor. 1 tap, 2, 4, 1. Numbers. Eleanor recognized the pattern from the scrap hidden inside Cecily's key. Cabinet 1, Shelf 2, Volume 4, Page 1, The Royal Genealogies. She stopped. The guard tightened his grip. "Keep moving, Your Grace." Eleanor looked back at the king. The South Fort was never their true target. Everyone turned toward her. The attack was meant to remove the guards from the palace archive. Solution's face went still. Eleanor continued before the guards dragged her through the doors. Cabinet 1 contains the sealed records, proving the royal succession. If those records are replaced before Parliament meets tomorrow, the conspirators can challenge the king's right to the throne. King George shouted for the archive to be secured. A bell began ringing from the northern tower. Not an alarm, a death toll. One of the palace guards appeared at the far end of the corridor, his uniform stained with blood. "The royal archivist has been found inside Cabinet 1, he cried. "He is dead, and the succession records are gone." The guards continued dragging Eleanor toward the eastern apartments. "Release her," King George called from behind them. They stopped. Solution immediately objected. "Your Majesty, the Duchess remains accused of conspiring with her husband, and she identified the true target before any of us. That may mean she knew the plan." King George looked toward Adrian. "You demanded her confinement. Can you offer me one reason to trust her now?" Adrian glanced at the sapphire ring lying on the council table. "She has saved your life twice today." "That is not what I asked." The question required Adrian to place Eleanor's character above his political survival. Once, she would have waited for his answer with hope. Now she expected nothing. "I cannot prove she is innocent," Adrian said, "but I know she would never murder an unarmed archivist." Eleanor almost laughed at the poverty of his defense. 6 years of marriage, and the strongest certainty he could offer was that she would not kill a defenseless old man. "Keep guards with her," the king ordered, "but bring her to the archive." The dead archivist lay beside an open iron cabinet. There was no dramatic wound, only a purple mark at his throat, where a cord had tightened. His keys remained attached to his belt. The cabinet shelves were empty, except for a torn strip of red leather. Eleanor remained at the threshold. "Do not move the body," she said. Solution scoffed. "Have you become a physician as well as a translator?" "No, but the dust will tell us who approached him." A layer of pale restoration powder covered the floor. Several boot prints crossed it, most belonging to the guards who had discovered the body. One narrow trail ended beside the rear wall. Eleanor pointed toward it. There. Adrian followed the prints to a shelf of prayer books. Behind them, a wooden panel stood slightly open. "The old delivery passage," he said. "The same passage used by the assassin." A guard pulled the panel aside. Cold air rushed into the archive. The conspirators had entered and escaped without passing the palace doors. King George examined the empty cabinet. "What exactly was taken?" "The original record of Your Majesty's birth," Eleanor answered. "The late king's marriage declaration, and the sworn testimony confirming the lawful succession." "And what happens if Parliament does not see them tomorrow?" Solution answered before she could. "Your Majesty's political enemies will demand that the succession vote be delayed." "For how long?" "Long enough to appoint a temporary regent." The king's gaze hardened. "Who would qualify?" Lucian lowered his head respectfully. "As the senior royal councillor present in London, I would be required to serve." The truth finally stood in plain sight. Cecily's uncle had not merely intended to gain influence over the crown, he intended to place the government in his own hands. Eleanor looked toward Adrian. By removing her from the council, he had given Cecily control of royal correspondence. By signing unread pages, he had provided the forged confession. By ordering Eleanor's confinement, he had transferred the evidence into Cecily's vault, while palace guards were diverted to the South Fort. Every disaster had entered through a door Adrian had opened. A messenger rushed into the archive. "Your Majesty, the men at the South Fort have surrendered. They claim they served under the Duke of Ravenscroft." Adrian went rigid. "They are lying. They carried contracts promising land from your private estate." King George took the documents. Each bore Adrian's signature. His political career ended in the silence that followed. "You are relieved of military authority," the king said. "Your seat upon the Privy Council will not be considered." Until this matter is resolved, the Crown will seize your official correspondence and restrict access to Ravenscroft House." Adrian bowed his head. He had sacrificed Eleanor to preserve his future, only to lose that future because he sacrificed her. Cecily approached him with false gentleness. "I warned you that your wife would destroy everything." Adrian recoiled from her touch. "No, I destroyed it when I believed you without reading a single page. It was recognition, but it was not repair." Eleanor turned away. A faint scent reached her from the dead archivist's coat. Lavender and old paper. Beneath it was something sharper, almond oil. She knelt beside him and noticed a dark blue thread caught around one of his buttons. Cecily's gown was blue, but its silk was too pale and smooth. This thread was coarse wool, a servant's uniform. The missing maid had been here. Eleanor searched the archivist's right hand. His fingers were closed around a small paper label printed with 2 words, Saint Orison. "That is not Latin," Adrian said. "It is the name of a monastery." Professor Mercer shook his head. "Saint Orison has been abandoned for nearly a century." "Not the monastery," Eleanor said. "Its printing house." She remembered the brass letter R and the old royal press hidden beneath the palace. The stolen records could not simply disappear. To challenge the succession, the conspirators needed convincing replacements aged to resemble the originals. St. Orison possessed one of the few surviving presses capable of reproducing medieval lettering. "They are forging new succession records," Eleanor said. "The originals will be destroyed once the copies are completed." "How long would that require?" the king asked. "With prepared ink and parchment, several hours. They must return the forged records before Parliament assembles at noon tomorrow." "Then we march upon St. Orison tonight," Adrian said. King George stopped him. "You command nothing." The consequence struck visibly. Adrian had spent his life believing rank guaranteed usefulness. Now his title could not move a single soldier. Eleanor studied the label again. One corner was wet with blood, but another substance had marked the reverse. A powdery white crescent. Not dust, flour. The missing maid did not carry this from St. Orison, she said. She passed through the royal kitchens. A young scullery girl near the doorway flinched. Sir Lucian noticed. That girl knows something. He seized her before the guards could intervene. The child cried out as he dragged her forward. "She helped them," Lucian declared. "Question her." Eleanor stepped between them. "She is 12 years old. She may know where the records were taken. Then frightening her will make her say whatever saves her." Lucian's fingers tightened around the girl's shoulder. Eleanor removed his hand. "You no longer command this investigation. I may command the country by tomorrow." The threat was quiet enough for only Eleanor to hear. She guided the trembling child toward a bench and asked her name. "Annie, did someone give you the label?" Annie nodded. "Lady Cecily's maid. She came through the kitchens with a bundle wrapped in red leather. She said men would kill her if she stopped." "Where was she going?" "To the old chapel stable." A black carriage waited there. Eleanor glanced at the flower on the label. Did she touch the bread table? She hid something beneath it. A guard returned moments later with a folded message recovered from the kitchen. It contained only one line. "The originals remain in London. Follow the bells that never ring." Professor Mercer crossed himself. "The chapel of St. Orison has no bells. They were removed after the fire." "Then the message warns us not to follow the obvious destination," Eleanor said. King George faced her. "Can you find the records before noon?" Eleanor looked at Adrian, stripped of command, yet still bound to every forged order bearing his name. "I will find them, to protect the people who would suffer under a stolen crown." Adrian stepped closer. "And me?" She met his eyes without softness. "You will answer for your choices, whether I succeed or fail." A clock sounded 9 times above the palace. 15 hours remained before Parliament assembled. Then, from somewhere beneath the archive floor, a bell began to ring. The bell rang a second time beneath Eleanor's feet, then a third. "It is coming from below the archive," Adrian said. "There is no chapel beneath this wing," Professor Mercer replied. "No," Eleanor said, remembering the old inventory. "But there was once a servant's signal room. Before speaking tubes and mechanical bells had been installed throughout the palace, servants below stairs used ropes to summon assistance from distant rooms. Most had been removed during renovations. Most, but not all." Eleanor crossed to the shelf, concealing the delivery passage. Inside, the cold stone corridor divided in two. The first branch led toward the abandoned royal press. The second descended beneath the palace. "Annie," Eleanor said gently, "did Cecily's maid tell you anything else?" The girl nodded. She said, "If the bell rang after 9, I should bring someone who could read the prayers on the wall." Latin prayers. The missing maid had not fled the conspiracy. She had been forced to help it and was trying to guide Eleanor toward the stolen records. King George selected 4 trusted guards. Adrian moved toward the passage with them. "You will remain here," the king said. "Those documents were stolen using my seal, which is precisely why I cannot permit you to command armed men." Adrian's humiliation passed across his face. Eleanor could have left him there. Instead, she said, "I need him." Adrian looked at her in surprise. "He knows the private seals used on his estate," she explained. "If the forged contracts are connected to the stolen records, he can authenticate them." The king considered her request. "He accompanies you without rank or command. He follows your instructions." Eleanor faced Adrian. "You will touch nothing unless I permit it. You will answer every question truthfully, even if the answer damages your name, and you will not overrule me again." His voice was quiet. "I accept. That is cooperation, Adrian. It is not forgiveness." "I know." The underground passage narrowed until Adrian's shoulders nearly touched both walls. Eleanor walked ahead with a lantern, following the bell rope through layers of dust. Every few yards, fragments of Latin prayer appeared upon the stones. The sentences seemed devotional, but the first word of each line formed directions. "Turn east, descend 7 steps, avoid the iron door." Her father had taught her to read such acrostics when she was a girl. He believed language was not merely a mark of education, but a refuge for truth when powerful people controlled ordinary speech. Adrian studied her as she translated the final instruction. "How many nights did you spend learning this?" "Most of my childhood. I thought your father taught you only because he wanted a son. He taught me because I was the best student he ever had." A sad smile touched her mouth. "You never asked." Adrian lowered his eyes. They reached a small chamber containing an old servant's desk, a narrow cot, and the bell rope. Cecily's maid lay beside the wall, with her hands bound. She was alive. Eleanor rushed to her while the guards searched the chamber. The maid's name was Ruth. A bruise darkened her temple, and blue wax stained the cuffs of her dress. "I did not kill the archivist," she whispered. "I believe you." "Lady Cecily ordered me to carry the red bundle through the passage." Solution was waiting inside the archive. When the old man refused to open the cabinet, Solution strangled him. One guard prepared to leave with the testimony, but Eleanor stopped him. "A spoken accusation will be dismissed as fear or revenge. We need to preserve what she knows." Professor Mercer had given Eleanor a pocket notebook before they descended. She wrote Ruth's account word for word, recording the hour and location. 2 guards signed as witnesses. Then Eleanor wrapped the blue-stained cuff in clean linen and sealed it inside a small evidence box with wax from the king's own guard. "Keep this with Ruth," she instructed the senior guard. "Neither leaves your sight until they stand before His Majesty." For the first time that night, they possessed proof Cecily could not quietly reclaim. Ruth gripped Eleanor's wrist. "The records were not in the bundle." "What did you carry?" "Blank parchment and the Duke's seal." Adrian stiffened. "My private seal has been in my desk since yesterday." "Lady Cecily took an impression before returning it," Ruth said. "She laughed because you signed whatever she placed before you." Adrian closed his eyes. Eleanor saw the truth reach him more deeply than the loss of his council seat. Cecily had not defeated his judgment. She had exploited his refusal to use it. "Where are the originals?" Eleanor asked. "The archivist hid them before Solution reached him. He told me the Duchess would understand the bells." Ruth pointed toward the servant's desk. Carved into its edge were 4 Latin words. "Wisdom protects the forgotten house." Eleanor ran her fingers across the letters. The phrase had appeared on the first translation she completed for the Royal Council 6 years earlier, a list of pensions owed to the widows of dead diplomats. "The forgotten house is not a building," she said. "It means the families, the crown, ceased to remember." Her mother's pension records were stored in a small charitable office beyond the palace grounds. That office could become a base outside Adrian's control, a place Cecily would never associate with royal secrets. Eleanor rose. "The archivist sent the records to my mother." Adrian stared at her. Your mother is ill. She is also the widow of the man who designed half the crown's diplomatic ciphers. You told me she could barely leave her bed. I told you her medicine was expensive. You decided that meant she was helpless. Shame silenced him again. The charitable office stood behind a modest chapel 2 streets from the palace. Eleanor's mother received them beside a small coal fire. Her hands trembled, but her eyes remained keen. You took longer than I expected, she told Eleanor. From beneath the floorboards, she produced a red leather volume wrapped in oilcloth, the original succession records. Adrian released a breath. We have them. No, Eleanor said. We have one of 3. Her mother placed a second object on the table, a printer's proof bearing a false royal lineage. It named Sir Lucian as the nearest lawful descendant of a forgotten royal branch. In the margin appeared a fresh impression of Adrian's seal. The archivist brought both, her mother explained. He said the remaining originals were divided for safety. Where? He would not tell me. He feared the information might be forced from us. Adrian studied the forged lineage. My seal makes me appear to have authenticated Lucian's claim. You gave Cecily access to the impression, Eleanor said. I know. He removed his signet ring. For years, Eleanor had watched servants, secretaries, and political allies obey that crest. Now, Adrian placed it in her palm. Keep it, he said. Until this ends, I have no right to use authority I treated so carelessly. The gesture cost him something real, but Eleanor closed her fingers around the ring without offering comfort. You will publicly explain how Cecily obtained the impression. I will, even if it costs Ravenscroft its influence. Yes, then you may continue helping me. A crash sounded in the rear room. One of the guards shouted. Eleanor rushed toward the doorway, but smoke rolled through it. A bottle had shattered against the window, spreading fire across the curtains. Outside, wheels thundered over the cobblestones. Ruth screamed from the front room. By the time the guards extinguished the flames, she was gone. So was the evidence box containing her stained cuff. Eleanor's mother remained beside the overturned table, shaken but unharmed. Upon the empty floor lay a message written in blue wax. Bring the original record to Parliament, or the maid dies beneath its steps. Adrian reached for the message. Eleanor stopped him. The wax is still warm. Then they cannot be far. That is what they want us to believe. She examined the words without touching them. The blue wax had been pressed directly onto the floor, yet the letters were perfectly formed, not handwritten, printed. Someone had used the brass pieces from the abandoned royal press. Adrian looked toward the broken window. I can follow the carriage. If you leave, Cecily will claim you helped me steal the succession record. If I remain, Ruth may die. Eleanor heard the desperation in his voice. For the first time, Adrian was being forced to choose without the protection of rank, and every path carried a cost. We protect Ruth by refusing to obey blindly, she said. The message does not tell us when to bring the record. It says Parliament, because they need the original inside the building before noon. They cannot replace it while it remains here. Her mother lifted the red volume, then we keep it hidden. A heavy knock struck the front door. Royal officers, a voice called. Open by order of the Crown. Eleanor's mother looked toward her. I sent no message, Eleanor said. The officers forced the door before anyone could answer. Their commander presented a warrant bearing King George's seal. It ordered the arrest of Eleanor Blackwood and her mother for theft of royal property. Behind the officers stood Lady Cecily. Her blue gown had been replaced by sombre grey, and a bandage circled one wrist. I begged them to wait, she said, her voice thick with false regret. But the original succession record was found in this house. Adrian stepped between her and Eleanor. You set the fire and took Ruth. Cecily's eyes widened. Ruth attacked me while escaping. She confessed that the Duchess promised her money. Where is she? Under royal protection. You are lying. Cecily turned toward the officers. You see what Eleanor has done to him. The Duke no longer recognizes friend from enemy. The commander took the red volume from Eleanor's mother. We must return this to the palace immediately. Eleanor examined the warrant. The seal appeared genuine. The signature beneath it belonged to the king's private secretary. Yet the order had been issued 20 minutes earlier, before anyone at the palace could have known the record was in this office. You obtained this warrant before discovering the volume, Eleanor said. The palace received an anonymous report. From whom? That is confidential. Cecily smiled faintly. The trap was complete. If Eleanor resisted, she would appear to be hiding stolen royal property. If she surrendered the volume, Cecily's allies would control the only original they had recovered. The officers bound Eleanor's wrists. Adrian reached for his sword, but Eleanor shook her head. Do not give them violence to add to their story. He let his hand fall. Cecily watched the red volume disappear into the commander's satchel. For the first time that night, triumph showed openly in her eyes. At 11 in the morning, Parliament assembled beneath armed guard. Eleanor stood in the public gallery with her wrists still bound. Her mother had been confined elsewhere, and no one would tell her whether Ruth remained alive. Below, Solution addressed the peers. The Crown's succession records have been compromised by the Duke and Duchess of Ravenscroft, he declared. Until their authenticity can be restored, the law requires temporary protection of the realm. The forged confession was presented. The contracts carried Adrian's signature. The red volume recovered from Eleanor's mother was placed upon the central table. When royal scholars opened it, every page was blank. A shocked murmur filled the chamber. Eleanor stared at the empty parchment. The original had been exchanged during the journey from the charitable office. Solution spread his hands. The Duchess destroyed the true record after using its appearance to deceive the king. Cecily entered through the lower doors with Ruth beside her. The maid's face was bruised. A guard held her upright. Tell Parliament who ordered you to enter the archive, Cecily commanded. Ruth looked up toward Eleanor. Terror filled her eyes. The Duchess of Ravenscroft, she whispered. The words shattered the last visible defense. Eleanor's written testimony was gone. The stained cuff had been stolen. The original record had vanished. The only witness had been forced to accuse her. Solution turned toward King George. The Duke signed the orders. The Duchess directed the servants. Together, they attempted to erase the lawful succession and govern through a weakened crown. Adrian stepped into the center of the chamber. No, Solution smiled. Will you deny your signature? I will explain it. Adrian faced the king, the peers, and every political ally whose respect had once defined him. I signed pages I did not read because Lady Cecily promised her uncle's support for my appointment to the Privy Council. I gave her access to my library. I allowed her to use my seal. When my wife warned me, I called her jealous. When she produced evidence, I ordered her confinement and placed that evidence under Cecily's authority. Cecily's face tightened. Adrian continued. The signatures are mine, the orders are not. But the distinction does not absolve me. My ambition made every forgery possible. A wave of whispers passed through the chamber. I surrender my royal offices, he said. I relinquish command of the Ravenscroft Guard and submit my estate records to the Crown. If negligence under my seal requires prosecution, I will answer it. He had finally spoken the costly truth without asking whether Eleanor would forgive him. King George regarded him with grim disappointment. Your confession damages your defense more than theirs. I know, and still you make it. Adrian looked toward Eleanor. The truth ceased belonging to my convenience. It was the first honorable choice he had made since the hearing began, but it came too late to save her. Solution called for a vote to appoint him temporary regent. As the peers prepared their ballots, Eleanor looked again at the blank red volume. A faint white crescent marked its lower corner. Flower. The same flower found on the label held by the dead archivist. Then she remembered Annie's words. Cecily's maid had carried a bundle across the kitchen bread table. The flower had not marked the label by accident. The archivist had used it to identify the false bundle. The red volume was never the original. He had given Eleanor's mother a decoy because he knew someone would follow him. The true records were still hidden inside the palace. Eleanor looked at the parliamentary motto carved above the chamber doors. Its Latin words were taken from the same prayer that had appeared along the underground passage. Wisdom protects the forgotten house. Not the forgotten families. The forgotten house. An abandoned chamber of Parliament, sealed after a fire decades earlier. And the phrase, in Cecily's threat, the maid dies beneath its steps, had not named Ruth's execution place. It revealed where the records were hidden, beneath the steps of the forgotten house. Eleanor finally understood why Cecily had brought Ruth into Parliament. She still did not know the exact hiding place and needed Eleanor to reveal it. Solution raised his hand. All in favor of temporary regency. Before Parliament votes, Eleanor called from the gallery. Lady Cecily must answer one sentence in Latin. Laughter broke from several benches. Cecily looked up. We have endured enough of your performances. This sentence identifies where I concealed the original succession record. The laughter stopped. Cecily's attention sharpened. Eleanor smiled. It was not true, but Cecily could not know that. If you understand Latin, as you claimed before the royal scholars, translate it correctly, and the crown will recover the record. Eleanor had no intention of giving her the location. She intended to force Cecily to reveal that she already knew it. Sir Lucian lowered his raised hand. This is a desperate delay. Then it will cost you less than 1 minute. Eleanor replied. King George motioned for the guards to bring her down from the gallery. Her bound hands prevented her from lifting her skirts. Adrian stepped forward to assist her, but she descended without touching him. Once Eleanor stood before the parliamentary table, she faced Cecily. Translate this. Sub gradu Leonis Orientis, domus oblita, veritatem custodit. Cecily did not answer immediately. The sentence was simple enough for a beginning scholar. Beneath the step of the Eastern Lion, the forgotten house guards the truth, but it contained a trap. There was no Eastern Lion inside Parliament. Eleanor had invented it. Cecily looked toward Sir Lucian. His eyes moved involuntarily to the doors at the eastern side of the chamber. The sentence means the record lies beneath the eastern steps of the abandoned chamber, Cecily said. The peers began whispering. Eleanor remained still. I said nothing about an abandoned chamber. Cecily's face changed. You said domus oblita, which means the forgotten house. It could describe a family, a building, or even a neglected royal line. You supplied the abandoned chamber because you already knew it. Sir Lucian rose. A clever play upon words proves nothing. No, Eleanor agreed. But your glance toward the eastern doors proves you understood exactly which chamber she meant. The king signaled to 4 guards. Search beneath the eastern steps of the old parliamentary hall. Take Professor Mercer and 2 members from opposing political factions. No one else approaches the site. By choosing witnesses with competing loyalties, the king ensured that neither side could secretly replace whatever was found. Cecily watched the guards leave. Her fear was no longer hidden. Sir Lucian seized Ruth by the arm. The maid has already confessed. The Duchess employed her. Eleanor turned toward Ruth. Did you enter the royal archive on my instruction? Ruth's lips trembled. Cecily's fingers closed around the blue-stained cuff, visible beneath her own sleeve. A silent reminder of what would happen if Ruth changed her account. Eleanor saw it. So did Adrian. The evidence box, he said. You concealed Ruth's cuff beneath your dress. Cecily released her arm too late. Adrian approached the parliamentary table, but did not touch her. Your Majesty, order a female attendant to examine Lady Cecily. Cecily stepped backward. This is an outrage. You demanded my wife be searched and confined upon weaker suspicion. A matron was summoned from the adjoining chamber. Behind a privacy screen, she recovered the crushed evidence box, the stained cuff, and a narrow wire key from Cecily's underskirt. The king examined the unbroken seal on the box. This bears the wax of my personal guard. Eleanor looked toward Ruth. You no longer need to protect their lie. Ruth began to cry. Sir Lucian killed the archivist. Lady Cecily made me carry the parchment through the kitchens. They took me from the charitable office and threatened to kill Annie if I did not accuse the Duchess. A guard was dispatched to secure the young kitchen girl. Sir Lucian's voice rose. She is changing her testimony because the Duchess promised mercy. I promised her nothing, Eleanor said. But your niece carried the very evidence stolen during Ruth's abduction. Cecily recovered enough composure to laugh. The Duke could have placed it upon me. He stood near me before entering this chamber. Adrian faced the assembled peers. I did not, but my word alone should not be accepted. I have already demonstrated how little care I gave to truth when it threatened my ambition. The admission deprived Cecily of the argument she expected him to make. Eleanor studied the forged confession again. Your Majesty, may I see the document bearing Adrian's signature? The king placed it before her. Eleanor did not dispute the handwriting. Instead, she held the page beside the contracts recovered from the South Fort. Adrian signed both, but noticed the small tear beside every signature. Several peers leaned closer. Cecily said, paper tears. Not in the same place 6 times, Eleanor explained, without turning the moment into a lecture. Cecily had placed ribbons over the false pages, marking where Adrian should sign. When the ribbons were removed, their hardened wax tore the paper at the same angle. "The signatures are genuine," Eleanor said. The documents above them were replaced. Sir Lucian scoffed. "Even if true, that proves only the Duke's carelessness. It proves how you acquired his name. The old printing press proves how you copied mine. The blue wax connects Cecily's authority to the altered manuscript. Ruth places both of you inside the archive, and the false lineage identifies your motive." Eleanor lifted the printer's proof, naming Lucian as heir. "You did not attack the crown to serve another claimant. You manufactured one." Lucian's face remained calm, but a vein pulsed at his temple. "The lineage is authentic. Then tell Parliament the name of the medieval queen from whom you descend." "Queen Adelina." A few scholars nodded. "The false record used that name?" Eleanor asked. "And which monastery recorded her son's birth?" "Saint Orison." There it was. The impossible knowledge. Professor Mercer had not yet returned with the original records. The only document connecting Queen Adelina to Saint Orison was the forged lineage recovered from Eleanor's mother, an object Sir Lucian had publicly claimed never to have seen. Eleanor turned toward the peers. "The proof shown to Parliament contains no mention of Saint Orison. That name appeared only upon the private printer's draft, found in my mother's office." Sir Lucian's composure finally broke. "You quoted it inside the archive." "I said the name of the monastery. I never connected it to Queen Adelina." Cecily stared at her uncle. In attempting to defend his claim, he had revealed knowledge only the conspirators possessed. Footsteps sounded beyond the chamber. The guards returned carrying a metal chest coated in soot. Professor Mercer walked beside them, accompanied by the two opposing peers. "We found this beneath the eastern steps," he announced. The lock was intact. All witnesses observed its opening. Inside lay 2 red leather volumes and a sealed letter written by the murdered archivist. Sir Lucian lunged toward the chest. Adrian stopped him, but the guards, not the Duke, placed Lucian in restraints. Professor Mercer lifted the first volume. "If this is the original royal succession record, its final page will contain a restoration mark known only to the archivist and myself." Eleanor looked at Cecily. The woman's face had turned white. Mercer opened the volume to its final page, raised it toward the light, and prepared to reveal the mark. Professor Mercer angled the final page toward the morning light. A small silver crown appeared within the parchment fibers. "The restoration mark is genuine," he said. "This is the original succession record." For several heartbeats, no one spoke. The royal scholars who had laughed when Adrian declared that Eleanor could not read Latin now sat speechless before the woman who had preserved the crown. Mercer opened the second volume. It contained the late king's marriage declaration and the sworn testimony confirming King George's lawful birth. Every missing record had been recovered. The sealed letter belonged to the murdered archivist. King George broke its wax himself. In the letter, the archivist described seeing Sir Lucian enter the restricted archive with Cecily's key. Realizing that the succession records were their target, he had hidden the originals beneath the abandoned parliamentary chamber and delivered decoys to Eleanor's mother. He had also recorded the entire conspiracy. Sir Lucian intended to replace the authentic records with a forged lineage, naming himself as the nearest lawful descendant of a forgotten royal branch. Cecily would control every Latin translation presented to Parliament, ensuring that no scholar saw the false dates or invented monastery entries. But Eleanor had remained the principal obstacle. She knew the ancient dialects. She understood the archive system, and unlike Adrian, she read every document before accepting it. So Cecily persuaded the Duke that his wife was jealous, dishonest, and socially embarrassing. She promised Adrian the political influence he desired, then used his pride to remove Eleanor from the council. Once Adrian signed Cecily's accusation, the conspirators gained access to the royal archives. Once he signed unread petitions, they gained his signature. Once he confined Eleanor, they gained control of the evidence. The scheme had not succeeded because Sir Lucian was stronger than the Duke. It had nearly succeeded because Adrian chose ambition over the wife who had repeatedly warned him. King George folded the archivist's letter. "Sir Lucian Vale, you will stand trial for treason, murder, and conspiracy against the crown." Lucian's restraints tightened. He looked toward the peers who had nearly voted him regent, but not one met his eyes. "Lady Cecily Vale," the king continued, "you will stand trial for forgery, abduction, destruction of royal records, and participation in that conspiracy. Cecily turned desperately toward Adrian. You wanted the council seat as much as I wanted influence. Do not pretend you are better than I am. Adrian did not look away. I am not innocent, but I will not become more guilty by protecting you. You loved me. No, I loved how important you made me feel. The truth ended whatever illusion remained between them. Cecily was taken from the chamber beside her uncle. Ruth remained under royal protection, and Annie was found unharmed in an empty gatehouse where Lucian's men had hidden her. The king then faced Adrian. Your wife exposed the conspiracy, but her courage does not erase your conduct. I understand. You surrendered your offices before the truth was certain. That will be considered. Nevertheless, you gave royal authority to a conspirator, signed documents without reading them, publicly accused an innocent woman, and attempted to preserve yourself by confining her. Adrian removed the Ravenscroft ceremonial sword and placed it upon the parliamentary table. I accept the Crown's judgment. He lost his military command and his promised place on the Privy Council. For 5 years, all official use of the Ravenscroft seal would require independent approval from royal trustees. The penalty did not destroy his estate or title. It did something more appropriate. It deprived him of the unquestioned authority he had treated as his natural right. King George ordered Eleanor's restraints removed. Adrian approached her, but stopped several feet away. Before the king, Parliament, and the same scholars who had witnessed her humiliation, he bowed to his wife. I accused Eleanor because listening to Cecily served my ambition. I dismissed work I was willing to claim when it benefited me. I suspended her mother's pension to force her submission, and when she placed the truth before me, I chose my reputation over her freedom. His voice shook, but he continued. No forgery compelled those choices. They were mine. Eleanor watched him straighten. He did not ask her to defend him. He did not ask whether she still loved him. That restraint was the first sign that his remorse belonged to her injury rather than his loneliness. Adrian placed a signed declaration before the king. It restored Eleanor's mother's pension with repayment of every withheld amount. It also transferred Eleanor's marriage settlement income to independent trustees of her choosing and granted her separate residence at Ashcombe House. Finally, he surrendered any authority over her scholarly work. King George read the declaration. Do you accept these terms, Duchess? I do. The king then offered Eleanor permanent leadership of the Royal Translation Council. You have earned the position. Eleanor looked towards Cecily's empty chair. I will accept on one condition. No translation affecting the crown will ever again depend upon one person's authority. Every document must be reviewed by 2 independent scholars. King George smiled. Granted. 6 months later, Eleanor stood once more inside the royal council chamber. The burned manuscript rested beneath protective glass. Beside it lay the brass mirror that had first revealed the hidden names. Adrian entered without a sword, political insignia, or expectation of welcome. He had written to Eleanor every week from Ravenscroft. None of the letters pleaded for forgiveness. Each contained an account of something repaired. Servants restored to their positions, archive rules enforced, pensions paid, and estate decisions reviewed before his seal was used. Eleanor had answered only twice. Now, he stopped at the doorway. I was told you wished to see me. I wish to hear what you have learned. That a title may compel obedience, but it cannot create wisdom. And that regret is not restitution. He placed no gift before her. He made no claim upon their marriage. I will continue repairing what I damaged, whether you return or not. Eleanor studied the man she had loved, the man who had betrayed her, and the man who was finally learning that remorse did not entitle him to restoration. I am not returning to Ravenscroft, she said. Pain entered his face, but he bowed. I understand. Not yet. He looked up. If you wish to know me again, you may visit Ashcombe on the first Sunday of each month. You will come without advisors, without servants, and without assuming the door will open. Hope appeared, tempered by humility. And if it does, then you may enter as a guest. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was a beginning offered on her terms. Adrian bowed once more and left without touching her. Eleanor turned toward the waiting royal scholars. The room fell silent, not because a duke had mocked her, but because the council now awaited her judgment. She opened the newly recovered Latin record. "Shall I translate it for you?" she asked. Every scholar leaned forward. Eleanor smiled, lifted her pen, and began.